All right. So again, I'm Catherine Brignac. I'm CC Ulster Livestock and Natural Resources Educator. So today our focus is going to be on adapting to changing growing seasons, as Haley said. Um, so just a brief overview of what's to come. So this is part one of the series. So today we'll go into more on seasonal variability, but I'm going to give first an overview of the climate impacts assessment for New York State as a whole, and some of the projections and adaptation suggestions that are made in that report. And I'm also going to go through some of the Cornell programs and resources available, and then I'll pass it off to Brett with Majestic Farms to talk more about what they've been seeing at their orchard. And then the next two webinars we have scheduled for this series will be on pest, weeds, and disease pressure on the 19th next week. And then in January, our first one will be on increased rainfall and water management. And we do hope to announce some more topics for January any day now once we get those confirmed. So keep an eye out for that as well. But yeah, to just give an overview, the state climate impacts assessment report, there's chapters for all different sectors, but there's a whole chapter devoted to agriculture. And this report was done by NYSERDA with a couple hundred different researchers and experts across the state from diverse communities, and intended to inform, businesses, farmers, and decision makers about how to prepare for climate impacts, and also how to adapt. So they take a deep dive into all of the different sectors, so livestock, fruit, vegetable, field crops. You can, read the full report, and I encourage people to do that. But some of the biggest impacts that they mentioned just statewide are more extreme heat and cold events, which I think is probably not news to anybody here. Changes in the amount and duration of precipitation, especially heavy rainfall, as well as drought, more frequent and intense storms, and then of course down in our Long Island region, sea level rise and saltwater intrusion into farmland and water sources. So it's not something we're going to go into here in the Hudson Valley, but one of the things that's mentioned there. Some other things that are worth mentioning, I think, that are discussed is climate change as a threat multiplier. So seeing that really add on to the other challenges that farms are facing in our state, as well as climate justice and equity. So we know a lot of our farming communities are already vulnerable communities. A lot of our farm workers are coming from vulnerable communities. So they talk a lot about that and make some suggestions for decision makers on those topics. And then again, climate resilience and adaptation strategies is a big part of that report. So I'll touch a little bit on that related to today's topic as I go through here. So yeah, for our region, Hudson Valley, Catskills, we're seeing extreme rainfall damaging crops, flooding fields, and also having the effect of increasing diseases and weeds. We're also seeing short-term drought, reducing crop yields and causing water shortages. We just dealt with this in the last couple months. We're seeing some changes to the seasonal cycles of plant and animal life. So that's going to be more of what we go into today. Part of that being warmer temperatures and longer growing seasons. And I'll go into the details of that. And then along with that, increased weed disease and insect damage to crops. And of course, some socioeconomic impacts. So both cost related to that, as well as risks to farms and farm workers from, hotter days, storms, and all of that. So we're hoping to cover all of these in more detail as we go through the season. So yeah, the biggest thing we're seeing with seasonal shifts, longer and warmer seasons. So we already saw a major shift in growing zone changes last year, 2023, when they put out the new maps. And you can see this is pulled from the impacts assessment, that by the end of the century, they're expecting the whole state to change pretty significantly in growing zones. So projected that the whole state, even up to the St. Lawrence Valley, will be between the zone 6 and the zone 9. So two whole zone changes, essentially. So you can dig into that a little more if you take a look at the report. But that's pretty significant change in our average temperatures. So, So what does that look like? From the data so far, we're seeing winters are warming a lot faster than summers. We've already seen an average increase, depending on where you're at in the state, of 1 to 4 degrees in the last century. And we're expecting average temperatures to increase another 4.5 to 9.5 degrees. And of course, that's somewhat dependent on what the emissions look like, which there's varying models depending on how much we're able to curb those emissions. But that's, it might not sound like a lot, but it's very significant increase. And then we're already seeing a lot more days over 85 degrees, and we're expecting that trend to continue. So that's not just extreme heat events, but also just higher nighttime temperatures, which can be, really problematic for livestock, especially. But of course, heat stress for crops, plants, and of course, humans, workers is a big concern. So being aware of that. And then our frost-free season has already increased by 9 or 10 days in some parts of the state. And we're expecting to see that increase by up to 30 days by 2055. So not that far out. So again, pretty significant increase in our season. And along with that, we're seeing a lot more warm days early in the spring, and then, followed by some of these late frost is kind of something we'll touch specifically on with fruit crops today, because that's been one of the biggest impacts people have probably seen so far. So yeah, just digging a little deeper, as I said, those warm spring temperatures followed by frost have been really devastating for some of our fruit crops already in the state. Last year we saw an extremely short maple syrup season, so that's been another impact just due to these really warm winters. And then we're seeing things like perennials, coming out of dormancy at really much different times than we've ever seen in the past. So that's shifting when people have to expect to harvest those things as well, of course, if they're starting to grow earlier. And then, our warmer temperatures, of course, can have benefits. So we could see increased yields for some crops. And it does offer us some opportunities to grow new crops potentially. So it's not all doom and gloom. We do have warm weather crops we can look at and different varieties that maybe we haven't been able to grow in the past. But along with that warmer and longer growing season, we are seeing more generations of some pests be able to happen throughout the season. We're seeing warmer and more humid weather that's promoting, certain diseases like fungal diseases that really like that climate. So we're also seeing a shift of when to expect some pests and disease. So those are all things we want to be able to plan for. The other big seasonal shift we're seeing is our changes in precipitation patterns. So this was showing October 21st to November 19th of this year. We had, a massive drought throughout the most of the state and Northeast as a whole. So on average, our precipitation has increased and is projected to increase. But along with those more intense rain events, which is often where we're seeing that increased precipitation, we're also seeing more dry spells, more droughts, and that's expected to increase as well in the future. So, more heavy rains, but also more droughts. So thinking about how can we take advantage of that extra water when we have it and hang on to it for these dry periods. Another thing along with the warmer temperatures is we're seeing more precipitation. Unfortunately, that often looks like more rain, less snow, which we know means more mud, which nobody in farming really likes to hear, more mud. So thinking of how we can deal with that and be prepared for that. So some cross-sector recommendations in the report. Of course, diversifying your operation, whether that's the crops you're growing, the cropping systems, utilizing controlled environment spaces when available or applicable, considering crop insurance if that's available for what you're producing. Improving soil health is great no matter what sector you're in for climate resiliency. Renovating your buildings for being able to withstand storms and also to be more energy efficient. and we'll provide some resources for that later in the series, and adjusting the timing location of activities. So that may be harvesting or moving animals at a different time of day to avoid the heat, or a different time of the season, or potentially changing the location of fields or what's in certain fields to avoid places that are flooding. And then, yeah, all of that can be part of adaptation planning. So I'll provide a link for where you can look for the adaptation workbook to do some planning from the USDA. Yeah, but when thinking about crop planning, you can adjust your planting times, trial new varieties, think about whether you can fit in another succession, because we have this longer season. If you're doing something like vegetables, we've seen a lot the last few seasons, maybe needing to harvest earlier. I know hay got really out of control for some people the last few seasons, a lot sooner than they expected. And that also may look like needing labor earlier or later in the season. So including all of that in your planning, looking for varieties that can tolerate more heat or are more drought resilient, especially if you don't have irrigation, and potentially looking at investing in that irrigation or water storage, and potentially some controlled growing spaces. So, there are funds available for a lot of that through our local governments in our state. And then for livestock, just mentioning, maybe thinking about having hay at different times of the season. So we're seeing, with that summer heat wave, a lot less forage available sometimes. So maybe needing to feed hay during the summer rather than, just during the winter. And also considering something like trees, silvopasture for providing shade. And so then when we get into the warmer winters and later frost, again, diversifying where possible. This is, I know, tricky for perennial fruit. Obviously, there's the things customers want, and of course, you're not trying to tear out trees and put in new trees, but thinking about starting to put in some new cultivars or maybe try out new fruits altogether. And then investing in equipment for frost prevention if you haven't already. So either wind machines or row covers for things like strawberries. And then with less snow, more rain, making sure you're avoiding compaction, avoiding getting out in those really wet fields whenever possible, whether that's with animals or with your tractor. And then considering upgrades to those high traffic areas like pens, sacrifice slots, all of that. So to really avoid having animals just constantly in that wet, muddy environment and all the compaction that comes with that. So, drainage upgrades, things like that. And then overall, just improving your soil health. Cover crops like you see in this picture can help really avoid that waterlogged, muddy fields. And just generally, we don't want to see bare soil for the heat or the rain. So some of the resources available, climatesmartfarming.org, which is a project that includes Cornell. They have lots of projections and data on climate for New York and a number of tools, which I'll show on one of the next slides. And then the USDA Climate Hub for the Northeast has more adaptation resources geared towards agriculture, including that adaptation workbook. So yeah, New York Soil Health has a lot more information on those soil health practices for different sectors, and things like nutrient management, water management, integrated pest management, and forecasting tools. So yeah, these are some of the climate smart farming tools specifically for this topic. So there's an apple stage and freeze damage probability tool, grape hardiness and freeze risk tool. So I encourage people to check out some of what's available there on climatesmartfarming.org. And I will leave it at that for my part and pass it over to Brett.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And yeah, just so everybody knows, all those resources are going to come out in your follow-up email if you didn't catch them during the slide. Give me just 1 second. I'll start sharing my screen for Brett's presentation.
Oh, like some farms, it's primarily Hello, and thank you for coming to my talk today. My name is Brett Budde, and I run Majestic Farm with my wife, Sarah. Today I'm going to be talking about resilient farming in an uncertain climate. Please take note of my Instagram tag and my website address, and if you want more pictures and to have a better idea of our farm, checking out either one of those is a great way to get a well-rounded view of our operation. So today I'm going to be talking about real-world examples on my farm that will be kind of buttressing a way of thinking about how you can be more resilient at your farm in the age that we're living. And so I want it to be more, hopefully, about a way of thinking rather than about a bunch of anecdotes about how I'm trying to be more resilient on my farm. Just a quick outline of what I'm going to be up to during the talk. At first, I will be discussing Majestic Farm and what we do at Majestic Farm and give you a little background about our operation and so that you have context. And then after that, I'm going to be giving real world examples of things that I've done on the farm in order to help protect us against strange climate events and things like that. Just so you know, this is pre-recorded, and I will be in the Zoom call for questions afterwards. But if you do have a question and type it into the text box, I'll get a chance to look at it before the slide stops and have a more informed answer for you at the end. Okay. 17 years ago, my wife and I moved out to a woodlot. It had a single wide on it, and about 2 acres of it were cleared. Our farm is about 24 acres, and I believe we've cleared about 16 of it. In these photos, you can see the progression of our farm over the last 16 years, and my wife and I did all the work on the farm. We built the house and the barn. We did not end up clearing the land. I think we kind of stopped doing that ourselves in 2010 and found somebody to help us clear the land later on. It was just too much work, and I thought it would turn us old. In this photo, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see those lines, and those are our apple trees. We have an organic apple orchard. We raise pigs. They're all raised outside. We do some farrowing in the wintertime in the barn, but other than that, they live outside all year in these sort of doghouse structures. These are mangalistas. I did a little run of those. It's the only pig I've ever had chase me like a mad dog. These are large blacks. This is what we run now. We finish anywhere between 50 and 75 pigs a year. All of the pork products we raise are processed in a USDA facility and sold direct to market. We do a tiny little bit of very local wholesale. These are our chickens. We raise them in coops made out of old camper trailers. which was a great idea in the beginning, but eventually we're going to move on from that. We do anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 chickens a year. We sell all of our products through farmers markets, off the farm, and stuff like that. Again, we do, I don't know, maybe 5% wholesale. This is a flyover of the apple orchard. We have 4 acres of organic apples. We sell predominantly through U-picking, although some of them do get sold at our farmers markets. And then at the end of the season, they also get sold for hard cider making. And you can see 2 of our tiny houses in this film as well. Outside of our apple picking, we also have agritourism that people come for farm stays. We have 4 cabins, and there's an outdoor kitchen, outdoor bathroom, and outdoor shower for people to use when they come to visit. We get a lot of families and young couples that want to experience nature and stay on our farm. When I think about risks to my farm, I like to think through the lens of risk management and resilience. And risk management is really about sort of focuses on identifying risks and then what you can do about them. So for example, we have a problem with the late frosts here, and they damage fruit in our apple trees. So a risk management strategy realizes that frost is a significant risk, and then the types of things you would do to mitigate that risk could possibly be to buy frost protection equipment, or if you have hedgerows that are holding cold air in as it comes down on your crop, you might cut a cold air drain in the trees so that the cold air will drain out rather than sit on your crop. And then when we think about resilience, I think about it in a larger framework, and I often think about crop diversity. So if you lose your apples, you still have an opportunity to make a living off of other parts of your business. And then also income diversity. Now I'm going to talk about some climate-related catastrophes that have happened to farms in our area. This is Apple Pond Farm, and they had been hit by a tornado, which is actually pretty rare for the Catskills. Apple Pond Farm is a pillar of our community. They run a renewable energy center as well, and everybody knows them. And something amazing that happened after this was people came out of the woodwork and helped them like clean up and repair and try to get their life back on track. And so, although I wouldn't think of this as a strategy, it's important to notice that community support is something that can be really helpful when you're under the gun as a farm. One thing that's important to have when you have a total loss situation like Apple Pond Farm does is insurance. And I know it's an obvious thing, but when I saw the damage at Apple Pond Farm in the newspaper, I thought to myself, my goodness, I could never survive something like this. And after thinking about it for 4 days, I called my insurance agent and we went over all of the coverage for my farm. And it's definitely costing me more money, but in a situation like that, you want to be able to be made whole again. Otherwise, you'll lose your livelihood. These are apple buds from my 2023 apple season. That year we had a beautiful bloom and a fantastic fruit set, but late in the season we had a very cold night and had a massive freeze event. It was 24 degrees in the orchard for 3 hours, and when I got out there, the fruitlets, which were the size of peas, all looked like frozen peas. And we have 2,500 apple trees, and that year my son and I picked a bushel of apples out of the orchard. And the year before that, 2022, we had a very light crop, and so this was a significant threat to our income, but it really turned out to be okay because we have a diversified farm. I was still bringing in money from farm market sales of our meat, and also we had the tiny house income. And so although we didn't make much money those 2 years, we had no problem paying our bills and taking care of the family. This is a piece of equipment that I could have purchased before these events, and it probably would have helped quite a bit. I might have gotten a half of crop rather than nothing. This kind of stuff is really expensive. The price tag on this machine is somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000. But, if it works for a season, it really pays for itself. So after I have another good year, I'm definitely going to be purchasing one of these devices. And I understand that a lot of people in the audience probably are not apple growers, but being aware of options that will protect you during natural disasters can help you plan for the future. And if you're able to sit down and look at the numbers and notice that maybe it's a great option to invest in something that can protect you, but you wouldn't know about it if you don't look into it and look at the numbers. This is my friend's orchard in Wurtsboro. His name is Andy Brennan. He owns Aaron Burr Cidery. They make hard cider. And this spring, as you'll see on the next slide, he had trouble with sponge moths, and they defoliated his whole orchard and the forest around his farm. These photographs are taken about a month apart, and as you can see, there's no leaves on the trees. So Andy lost crop for this year, and with apple trees, when the petals are falling off the bloom, the buds for the following year are developing on the tree. And so when you have an event like this, you've lost not only the crop for this year because there's no energy to support it, you also lose the crop for the following year. And what Andy did was offer a case of cider to anybody that would bring him a bin of apples. And to my surprise, Andy had a lot of apples to crush this year. And for him, he's looking for smaller apples, wild apples. These are the type of apples that give the best cider. So he received fantastic apples and so many of them that he made quite a bit of cider for next year. And I thought that was a really amazing way to deal with a huge problem. These are my apple trees. We planted high density apples, which means that they're dwarf apples. They only get about 3 feet wide and 10 feet tall. They're planted 3 feet apart from each other. And what's really nice about these kind of apple trees is that they produce fruit in the 3rd year. And I was in my mid-40s when I planted the orchard, and I couldn't imagine waiting to be in my mid-50s to have the apple orchard putting out a crop for me. But this is also a problem from a resilience standpoint, because the root ball in these apple trees is about the size of a 5-gallon bucket, and the soil is very shallow on our farm. It's probably anywhere from 2 to 3 feet deep until you hit ledge, and this makes us very susceptible to drought. And so I'm going to go over some strategies that I've used to deal with this problem, and hopefully this will help you think about things you can do at your farm to help prevent foreseeable problems. And we've had significant drought events and significant wet periods at our farm. And so I feel like this is probably one of the more in-depth areas of ways to think about serious limitations of your own farm, and then try to put this methodology of thinking towards them. When I was younger, I would I had a job taking kids out into the woods for camping experiences, and we'd take a group of kids out camping for a couple nights in the wilderness so they could experience the outdoors. And an important thing I learned about risk and dealing with that was, if you are out in the woods and you get lost, it's not a big deal, right? Maybe it's going to be an inconvenience. You might get stuck out in the woods for an extra couple hours. Worst case scenario, you're stuck out in the woods overnight, and hopefully you have a backpack with you and you can put on a warm sweater and cuddle up under some leaves and survive the night and walk out in the morning. But there's like a confluence of events that happen, and you find yourself in really huge problem. For instance, if you're out in the woods and you get lost and you failed to tell anybody that you were going out there, and then you trip and break your leg, getting lost in the woods goes from inconvenience to like a major life-threatening event. So we want to think about redundancies of systems and oddball situations that can affect our ability to deal with a simple problem. For instance, if your well goes dry and you've got a bunch of thirsty animals out in your farm, and then you go to transport water with your tractor, and it happens to be the only way you can move water around, you're going to find yourself in a really difficult situation. So on my farm, because water is such a huge issue for me, we have this is our irrigation pond, and I also have 3 wells, all of which are really garbage, and none of them, even collectively, would begin to water the orchard. I need a full inch of rain on the orchard every week, And so we're talking about thousands of gallons of water. And so I've come up with a lot of ways to deal with that situation. I'm going to go over those now. Because water is a big issue for us, and we've had a lot of experience with drought. I'm constantly thinking of ways to move water around, and there's a lot of actual inexpensive ways to move water around. I love these IBC totes because I can put them in the back of a pickup truck or on the front of my tractor with some forks and move water around. I also have a 1,500 gallon water tank that I could, in a long-term situation, put all the way up the top of my farm and pull water from the irrigation pond and fill that up, and then it could gravity feed all my livestock. So, if I find myself in a situation where I come home and I'm looking at my pigs and everybody's thirsty and the water trough is dry because the well went out or something like that, I've got this backup, and it's a redundant backup. Like if my tractor happens to be busy doing something else or not working for some reason, I have IBC tote that I could put in the back of the pickup truck, and that would get me through the afternoon. And we have the pump that's able to move water around and fill these IBC totes quickly, and so that's protecting me from, really kind of, I always think of it like if you have animals that are out of water and getting stressed out, I mean, that's a huge inconvenience, but it's also like a big threat. So 3 or 4 years ago, we had a very dry year, and the irrigation pond actually started to dry out. And I have a significant investment in the apple orchard, and I would go down there and dig the pond out deeper, and I could water for 3 or 4 hours, and then slowly it'd fill back up again, and I could water for 3 or 4 hours. But near the end of that drought, I started getting really nervous about the fact that I could be in a situation where there really wasn't a solution. And so I built a cistern that holds enough water to water my orchard for a week. So if I dumped this cistern, it would cover me for like 5 to 7 days. And I realized that, this is kind of an expensive option, but also it's an option that could save me at the end of the drought. Like, let's say that there's a drought on, and you never know how long they're going to last, but the irrigation pond has gone dry, so it's been going on for quite a while, and I'm going to dump this cistern water onto my orchard and empty the cistern, and then I could pay somebody to bring in a tanker of water every week, and that would cost me about $500 a week. But also, my hope is that when that event happens, that I'm protecting myself for a month, and it could prevent devastation. If I lost the apple orchard, it would be really a huge deal and a massive blow to the farm. This is a traditional modern orchard, and you can see there's herbicide strips there with bare ground, and so we're organic. We use manure fertilizer on our soil, which in turn adds organic matter to the soil and sort of gives us a buffer from a dry week, and it helps hold water in, and we don't have exposed dirt in our orchard, helping to prevent the orchard floor from drying out. And so, I mean, this isn't going to save you in a massive drought, but it certainly will help mitigate tree stress and things like that would, affect the crop. We want to think about risk management and resilience in a broad web as a redundant web that provides protection when something awful happens. So we're talking about having diversified crops, diversified income. I also want to mention all of our stuff is being sold retail, so we have wide margins. And we're out in the community selling our products at farmers markets. We have people on the farm camping. People come in the fall and pick apples. So we're building community support. But we also want to think about what our risks are. Pay attention to climate events and how other farms and farmers are being affected in our area, and evaluate those risks and see if we might be able to mitigate them in our farm, either by diversification or buying equipment to protect our crops and things like that. I was thinking about this talk, and I thought to myself, man, you've got a pretty unique situation over here. You've got a lot of different income streams on your farm. It's all retail sales, and I was worried. I thought, man, maybe this talk is not relevant to some of my audience. And when I think about farmers that are different than me, I like to think about my friend David Weiss. He's the largest dairy in Sullivan County, and he has a tremendous farm, and he's selling milk to the milk truck, which is completely different than me. But then when I think about his business, I go to visit David Weiss, and he has a small group of beef cattle that he raises and sells. So he's not just tied to dairy cattle. And then when I look at his operation, he owns equipment for making baleage and dry hay, so that if he has an extremely wet season, he's able to put up baleage for his animals, even if his dry hay production is down because of the weather. And then he's using secondary food sources, so he's getting brewer's grain from New Jersey, and he has a giant bulk bins to put this feed up for his cows. And then he also does things like run a sawmill, and he mills lumbers for local people, and he owns a wood processor. And so when I go there, one of his huge bulk bins is always filled with dry firewood to sell to people. So he has, diversified income and diversified crops going on. And there's a lot of thinking going on around, how do we weather the hard times? So this is like a way of thinking about your farm that can work for small farms like myself, or commodity producers like David Weiss. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about one point that I was making during my talk, and just go over it one more time. Community support is extremely important to all of us, but it's important to farmers also, because we're out in the wilderness doing a job that's actually known to be one of the most dangerous jobs you can have. And your neighbor can be the one to help you out of a difficult situation, or discover you if you've fallen off your tractor, or gotten run over by a bull, or a tree has fallen on you. So support your community, and they will support you. Thank you so much for coming out to my talk. I'm absolutely flattered that you're here, and I hope that everybody learned something and can apply it to their farm. If you have questions, I'm here to answer them. And if you have an off-topic question, feel free to email me. My email is up on the screen. Also, you can follow me at Instagram or check out my website if you want to get a better look at what we're up to at the farm. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everybody, for writing out the technical trouble that we had. I hope you were able to hear and follow along. Thank you so much, Brett. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.